thought-provoking conversations with authors, scholars, teachers, and healers who are on the cutting edge of ideas which will inspire, educate, and open our hearts to the multiple ways we can transform our world. The concept of reincarnation, that of an individual dying and then being reborn into another body, has existed in various religions for at least 3,000 years. It's gaining more and more popularity in Western cultures. And here today, to help us understand and to explore this topic, is Elissa Bentsen. Is that right? Bentsen?
That's correct.
That's it. Of Forever Souls. She is a former counselor and board-certified hypnotist. She trained with psychiatrist and author Dr. Brian Weiss, a pioneer in past life regression therapy. She draws from the work of Dr. Michael Newton, psychologist and researcher in between life regression. Ms. Bentsen is also a certified Lightworks method healer focusing on soul trauma repair. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm delighted and very excited that you're here. This is my favorite topic. Let's begin our conversation with the most fundamental question, I think, which is, what is the soul, in your opinion?
The soul is, from everything that I've read and from the great metaphysical thinkers whom I have studied, the soul is a form of energy. The soul is energy, and we know that energy never dies. This is a fact of science. Matter dies, the body disintegrates, but the soul, the energy of the soul, never dies. Mm-hmm. So that in itself raises the question of, where does it go? Mm-hmm. What happens to that energy if it never dies? Does it just float around in the universe somewhere? Or does it have a path, a plan of its own?
I see. When I think about the soul, and through my readings, also I've come to understand the correlation between soul and consciousness. And in your work, do you recognize the absolute relationship between soul and consciousness? Is there a exploration of consciousness in your work as well?
Yes, I mean, I think the example that I gave you was rather simplistic, but basically answers the question. The consciousness stays with the soul. There are people who think that the soul inhabits the body, and there are those who believe that the body just simply acts as a vehicle for the soul. However, whichever concept you feel most closely aligned with, I don't think that there's much argument that there actually is a soul. Yeah. Where the discrepancies seem to arise is, what is its function? Where does it go? Does it return to a body?
I just to pursue the question just a little bit, there's often a dichotomy between one's identity, the feeling of who one is, and one's soul. You see, the idea that you possess your soul, you have a soul. If you have a soul, then the soul is outside of you. That is, it's different from you, whereas my concept is that the soul is you. That core, that identity which is you, is the soul. And it's in spiritual searching. We are always interested in turning inward and finding the nature of the self, which is the soul.
I think the highest quest we can have as humans is to know our soul.
Absolutely.
But we also need to understand the distinction between the ego and the soul. The ego goes with us when we cross over. It goes with the body, whereas the soul continues on. The soul, the ego has its wants and its needs. The soul has its quest, its path to follow.
So
it's a much higher level of consciousness.
So could you tell us, why does the soul come back to body? Why?
Well, there are many reasons why the soul comes back to body. It has a lot of tasks to perform. It probably the two most predominant reasons is that it has karma, which is consequence from prior lives, from current life, that it has to resolve. It also has a quest to experience. The soul wants to experience everything, from the sublime to the ridiculous, from, for example, being very poor and destitute and constantly worried about one's survival, to being very wealthy, where survival in terms of base needs is never in question. So, and every little detail in between, which is why, from my perspective, from what I've seen working with my clients, I see all versions of what the soul wants to experience. And I tell my clients that in our earlier lives, in our earlier past lives, when life was tough, when the history of the world was very violent and dangerous, and danger lurked around every corner, and people were not educated, and there weren't medicines involved, and there was very little forms of healing involved, and very little consciousness. They lived violent lives. They were either the victim of violence or they were the perpetrator of violence. And they're still paying some of that karma now. It's coming around. And the events that happened in their current life are an indication of what karma occurred in the past life, what debt they incurred in a past life that they now are trying to rectify, to put into balance. The soul's ultimate quest is to reach ascended master status.
All souls.
All souls. To be so complete of karma, to have really worked through everything, that they reach the state of highest vibration or highest consciousness, which many refer to as ascended master status. Then they are at choice. They can still come back in a body, but when they do, they usually come back and are great leaders, healers, teachers, people like Mother Teresa, Gandhi are probably good examples. The Dalai Lama are good examples of ascended master souls. They just know the right thing to do and say and the right attitude to have, and they teach others how to do it.
I see.
The other role that an ascended master could take would be that of a teacher in spirit.
So disincarnate.
Disincarnate.
But still playing that role.
Playing the role of teacher still,
and
or guide.
Helping through dreams, helping
through dreams, through intuition, through however guidance they provide.
Do we have sort of angelic beings that play that role in minor ways around us?
Well, there's a difference between angels and spirits. Ascended spirits, master guides, guides of any kind, and we have many guides, have lived in body. They understand the human condition. They know what we go through on a daily. They know the hell that we create here for ourselves.
Absolutely.
So their awareness allows them to guide us in a different way, whereas angels and archangels have never been in body. And their role is also to protect, to guide, to instruct, but it's on a different level.
Idyllic? In a sense, more idyllic?
Yes, right.
I see.
Guardian angels can step in, or angels or archangels can step in at moments and do things that guides are not allowed to do. Guides have to be asked, which is why I really encourage people to do their meditation, to open up their chakras, their third eye, their crown
To be more
chakra
receptive.
to be more receptive to the guidance that is available to them. Because
That's very important.
if you
Yeah.
you may have a very difficult decision to make and are wrestling with it, and you could get a little nudge from a guide, but you don't ask.
Yeah.
They can't step in and nudge you unless you ask.
Now, reincarnation has tremendous societal significance, I believe. It could help bridge the rifts that separate us from each other by letting us experience ourselves as members of other religions, ethnicities, cultures.
Absolutely.
And experiencing also a past life regression can have extraordinary healing effects on both body and mind. So I'd like you to explain to our viewers, what is a past life regression?
Well, past life regression is a deliberate attempt to pull up from soul memory. Now, we have DNA, which follows us in our cells, generation through generation. But we also have something that's quite similar called soul memory. It is a recording of all of these past lives. We don't have access to it easily. It's not something that we can tap into easily. But with the use of hypnosis, we're able to go into the subconscious, which is where soul memory is stored, and pull up the data. It's kind of like having the hard drive on a computer. You want to get to a file, but you can't get to that file. You know it's there, but you can't get to it unless you use a certain kind of software. Well, hypnosis is the software that we use to access the past life memory.
I see.
And interestingly enough, most metaphysical thinkers and researchers believe that 85% of all our current life's problems, physical, emotional, spiritual problems, are related to past life, and only 15%, the icing on the cake, is current life. So when you're faced with an issue, particularly if it's a reoccurring issue, and you try to resolve it, and it doesn't seem, maybe you go to traditional therapy, and it just seems to hang on, or you make every attempt that you can think of to resolve it, and it still isn't quite moving away as you'd wish it to, chances are you've discovered something that relates to a past life.
That's very interesting. Then probably I should ask that an aspect of reincarnation I find very interesting is the growing scientific evidence that for instance, our facial features remain relatively the same from lifetime to lifetime, and that we bring our talents, our vocational proclivities with us, and we even tend to be with the same souls over and over again. So could you speak to that?
Well, I'm not so sure about the physical. I think pretty much, how do you take a picture of somebody from 3,000 years ago? So I think, although we do have current suggested pictures of people now versus who they were in a past life, particularly if they were famous people and were photographed or painted, I think most of that's anecdotal. But I do believe that our talents, our skills, our vocations and avocations definitely come from past life knowledge. It's like a build-up. Mm-hmm. And that we do interact with souls that we have interacted with in past lives because we have karma with those souls.
Mm-hmm. It's as if our death is just a brief interruption in the life that we were leading, and that we choose another entire different scenario to carry on and to see where our talents and our proclivities, both emotional and otherwise, can manifest in a new environment.
Right. I don't know that it's so much an interruption. I think it's a continuation, but on a different level.
But it's sort of a pause is what I meant, really. You know, as
well,
if it were...
if you listen to people who have near-death experiences, and we can assume that those that don't come back to tell us about it, they go on. It's just a motion, a transformation from one shape or form to another, one in which there is a body and one in which there's not, discarnate. The
but
soul
you are yourself.
You are still yourself. Yes. You're definitely still yourself. And you still have your issues to work out.
Now, I know you talk of karma, but in my mind, there are many people who are afraid of karma because karma can seem like a punishment.
Michael Newton is probably one of the more prolific writers on this subject of what happens once the soul leaves the body. He has regressed hundreds and hundreds of people who, interestingly enough, report almost identical experiences. Maybe not how they crossed over, but once they get there, there in the afterlife, the process that they go through is very organized. Which makes sense to me because this world is organized.
Yes.
We have
physical laws.
We have physical laws.
So
there's
metaphysical
right.
laws.
So there are metaphysical laws as well. And he seems to think that this interaction that we have with other souls while in a discarnate state, we're like in school. We're learning. We're not being punished. There's no punishment. There's no judgment. One of the first steps that people go through is to view their Akashic records or to go before their council of elders. It's kind of like, okay, this is your judgment day. But without the harshness that we think of traditionally as judgment day. Yeah. It's merely, this is what you did. How can you do it better? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's no punishment. Mm-hmm. There's no hell. I don't believe in hell. I don't think many metaphysicians do.
No.
We create that feeling, that sense of horror here on earth by our actions. But in spirit, there's no hell. Yeah.
It's merely a projection, I believe, of our own inability to own up to that which
we're responsible for.
Right. We don't want to be responsible, so we project it outside of ourselves. Something else made us do it.
Right.
And so I agree with that. But before we move on, I really think it's important that we dispel some of the myths that might be around hypnosis itself, so that people don't fear the process.
Right. It is so common a moment in someone's life that they don't even realize it. Hypnosis is nothing more than a slightly altered brainwave pattern, which everyone experiences twice a day, every day of their lives. It's the moment right before you fall asleep when you're not quite awake and you're not quite asleep. It's just simply an altered brainwave state. Mm-hmm. So it's nothing to be afraid of. Mm-hmm. It's certainly not some place that you can get stuck. You can always be brought out of hypnosis by someone who's trained. It's not a state in which you would do anything or say anything that was against your values or your morals. I know we all see these entertainer-type hypnotists who come on stage and make somebody cluck like a chicken or forget the number 4, and that's amusing. And they have actually allowed themselves to be put into that state. They're probably people who are not very self-conscious and want to go along with it. It's fun. But you take somebody who's got an extremely strong will and you can't hypnotize them. That kind of hypnotist won't.
Or is there someone who may be afraid of the process that also...
If someone is extremely afraid. I mean, theoretically, we can hypnotize anybody in a therapeutic setting, not stage hypnosis. But there are people who resist it, even though from their voice they say, I want to be hypnotized. It's one of the questions I ask the client right away, do you want to be hypnotized? Yes, I do. But on an emotional level, they're fighting it.
Absolutely.
But we have techniques to help them to go on. Yes. Mm-hmm. Pre-recorded, pre-induction tapes, which they are to listen to repetitively. Mm-hmm. Repatterns the brain waves, teaches them to relax and let go. Teaches them that there's nothing to be afraid of. They need, it's just a little conditioning, preconditioning.
I have. If someone were to come to you who had never been regressed before, tell me how long, on average, would it take before they could access a past life?
Well, I would say the induction on average takes about 15 to 20 minutes. Some people a little bit longer, some people a little bit less. It depends. There are certain signs the body gives off that I'm looking for when I'm hypnotizing someone to see how far under they are.
The authenticity of the state.
Right. Their little body tells, if you will, that indicate to me that they are truly under.
That's very exciting. Would you tell us, please, what are some of the benefits of past life regression?
Oh, there's so many benefits. Releasing negative energy from traumatic past experiences, recognizing people who have been in your past life who are there in your life now. We call these soul family members, people who come back with you repeatedly so you can help each other through an existence. There's physical release. I mean, people have experienced physical healing, emotional healing, spiritual awareness, much more spiritual awareness that comes from a regression, and particularly when we do the life between life portion. Understanding your soul's path, knowing what your soul's purpose was in a past life.
Now, there's a very important aspect of it.
Why did I come into this life? Maybe it was a very difficult life. Why did I do that? What was I there to learn?
Now, when a person is regressed, is there any possibility that what they're experiencing could be disturbing to them?
It could very well. I've had clients who have had what are called abreactions, where they're so sensitive to what they're seeing. And I think I need to back up a minute and say that there's two different ways people experience the hypnotic past life regression. One is more active, one is more passive. In the active state, you feel like you are the actor in the movie of your life. In the more passive state, you feel like you're a viewer watching the movie of your life.
Oh, I see.
But those particularly who experience it more actively may feel more about what's going on, and it can be upsetting. But we have ways of putting in a suggestion that they not feel that upset emotion, that they just simply see it as a movie.
Because I could imagine there are some past lives in which you are not behaving well. Yes.
Or that somebody didn't behave well to
towards you.
Right.
But what I've been told is that when you do re-experience these events, that your current life, you experience great healing in your relationships, you resolve issues that
Absolutely.
are on a very practical level that you never really could get to before.
Right, absolutely.
So
we have a classic example of that in one of Dr. Weiss's books.
You do?
Yes. His first book, Many Lives, Many Masters, is the story of primarily of a client, his first past life regression client, that he kind of stumbled into accidentally. He had a client, he calls her Catherine in the book. She came to him with an extreme phobia about anything around her neck. She couldn't wear a necklace. She couldn't wear a high collar or a scarf or anything. That she would, if she did, she would go into a major panic attack. He worked with her in traditional therapy, psychoanalysis, because he's a psychiatrist, for 2 years, and he wasn't really making any progress. And so he thought perhaps if he hypnotized her and took her back to her very early childhood, pre-verbal time, that he would uncover some clue. Perhaps another child, even a sibling may have reached into her crib and put their hands on her neck and she couldn't breathe, something. So he took her back to her birth. He found nothing. And in his frustration, he said to her, go back to when this problem first began. And she went back 3,500 years to a life in which she was an indigenous tribe member being attacked by another tribe, being strangled and dangled off a cliff. And as this action was going on, she was literally pushed off the cliff. She was a man in that life. She was pushed off the cliff to fall many, many hundreds of feet below to a ravine to her death. But she was alive during the time she fell off the cliff before she hit the ground. The panic that she felt and the feeling still of the hands around her neck combined created this phobia, this trauma. Once she re-experienced it, she released it.
Exactly.
And that portion of her issue was healed.
Well, I would be very interested in exploring with you some of the past life regressions that you've experienced with your clients. We won't have to name names or anything, but those that are interesting and maybe even have been corroborated historically. So perhaps at our next show, that's what we could do together.
I would love to do that.
Yes.
I'd love to share
I'd be
that.
very much pleased if you could come back with that. And I'm going to close the show now with what I like to do is I like to quote famous people who have something to say on the subject. And today it's Helena Blavatsky from Her Secret Doctrine. And she says this about reincarnation. That which is part of our souls is eternal. Those lives are countless. But the soul or spirit that animates us throughout these myriads of experiences is the same. And though the book and volume of the physical brain may forget the events within the scope of one terrestrial life, the bulk of collective recollections can never desert the divine soul within us. So I want to thank you.
You're welcome.
And
My pleasure.
I'll see you next week.
I look forward to it.
Looking forward to it as well. Thank you again.
Thank you.